They changed it. The rule that has protected your right to access your own cash for decades. The number that every American has known. $10,000. The Treasury just moved it. Proposed new threshold. Significantly lower. Your bank is already required to report it. Already required to flag it. And depending on how far they bring that number down, a transaction you made last Tuesday could now be on a government watch list. This is not a drill. This is not a conspiracy theory on a financial podcast. This is the United States Treasury Department discussing changes to the Bank Secrecy Act cash reporting rule. The rule that determines when your bank picks up the phone and files a report on you. The rule that has sat at $10,000 since 1970. 54 years, unchanged, until now. The question is not whether you should be paying attention. The question is whether you already missed the window to do something about it. And here is what I need you to know before anything else. There are 3 things happening simultaneously right now in the American financial system. 3 things moving in 3 completely different directions at the same time. The first is this cash reporting rule. What is real, what is rumor, and what the proposal actually says. The second is a global banking story spreading across every financial forum and podcast that millions of people have heard completely wrong. And the version they heard is not true. But what is actually true is far more important. And the third is something that just happened at the United States Mint. A quiet decision, almost no coverage, and it is the loudest signal in the financial system right now. I am going to tell you about Robert in a moment. 72 years old, retired teacher, walked into his bank this January after hearing that the $10,000 rule was changing. What he did, what the bank did, and what it tells you about exactly where things stand right now. But stay with me through all 3 of these, because by the time we are done, you will understand what is real, what is noise, and what you can actually do before the rule officially changes. Not panic, not speculation, clarity. That is what this is about. Welcome. Now let us get into it. Let us start with the rule you have probably already heard about, the $10,000 cash reporting threshold. Here is the plain truth. As of right now, there is no confirmed United States law that has officially lowered the long-standing $10,000 cash reporting rule. That rule has been in place for decades. It was established under the Bank Secrecy Act, and it requires financial institutions to file what is called a currency transaction report, a CTR, anytime a customer deposits or withdraws $10,000 or more in cash in a single business day. This is not a criminal accusation. It is paperwork. It is a documentation requirement that exists in almost every developed banking system in the world. Now, are there proposals and media reports suggesting that the Treasury Department may lower that threshold in 2026? Yes, those discussions are real. They are happening. They have been circulating through financial commentary, regulatory conversations, and certain corners of the internet for months. But here is what matters. Those proposals have not been enacted into law. They have not been fully confirmed. What you are hearing right now is the echo of a discussion, not the sound of a gavel coming down. I will tell you when that changes, and I want you to let me know when you hear something too. That is how this works best. Both of us watching, both of us paying attention. But here is the part most people do not fully understand about the existing rule, and it is the part that matters most for your daily life. Taking out cash, any amount of cash, is not illegal. Let me say that again, because the vague anxiety around this topic makes people forget the basic fact. Walking into your bank and withdrawing $10,000 or $20,000 or $50,000 is completely legal. The bank will file a CTR. That report will exist. But here's the reality about what happens to that report. It goes into a database. It sits there. The agencies reviewing these reports are significantly understaffed. Most of those reports are never individually examined. And more importantly, if you take out cash today and make a deposit somewhere tomorrow, you have created your own paper trail of exactly where that money came from and where it went. You have documented it yourself. There is nothing hidden, nothing suspicious, nothing that looks like anything other than what it is: a person moving their own money. The rule is not designed to stop you from accessing your funds. It is designed, and I want you to hear this clearly, to make you feel uncomfortable, to make you second guess whether you should pull money out at all. The psychological effect of the rule is the tool. The discomfort is the mechanism. And if you understand that, you can make clear-eyed decisions instead of fear-based ones. Now, let us talk about something that has been spreading far and wide across financial forums, podcasts, and social media feeds. A claim that sounds dramatic enough to be important. The claim goes something like this: Basel III has passed a new law stating that banks are no longer allowed to rehypothecate gold and silver. You may have heard this. You may have heard it presented as enormous news. Before I explain what Basel III actually did and did not do, let me explain what rehypothecation means, because the word is doing a lot of work here, and most people skip past it without understanding it. When you deposit money into a bank account, that deposit legally becomes an asset of the bank. You become an unsecured creditor, and the bank, under the legal framework of rehypothecation, has the right to use your deposit as collateral to borrow more, to leverage more, to create more financial activity built on top of what you put in. Your equity becomes their springboard. That is rehypothecation in plain terms. And the same concept applies to assets held at financial institutions. If a bank holds gold or silver, it can use that metal as collateral to borrow against, effectively multiplying its exposure. So the claim that Basel III banned this entirely sounds on the surface like a genuine and significant reform. It sounds like the kind of rule that would put real limits on how banks leverage physical metal. And if it were true, it would be front-page news across every major financial outlet in the world. But here is the reality. Basel III did tighten liquidity rules years ago, and those rules did have real implications for what is called unallocated gold, the paper gold that exists only as a ledger entry, not as a bar you can hold. Under Basel III's net stable funding ratio requirements, unallocated gold became more expensive for banks to hold on their books because it required more stable funding behind it. Physical gold held on a bank's balance sheet received what is called Tier 1 treatment, meaning regulators treat it as among the most reliable assets a bank can hold. But none of that is a ban on rehypothecation. Not in the United States, not in Europe, not in the United Kingdom, not in any document produced by the Bank for International Settlements, which oversees the Basel framework. There is no law, no regulation, no Federal Register notice, no official guidance that says banks cannot rehypothecate gold or silver. If that rule had passed, you would not have needed a podcast or a YouTube channel to tell you about it. It would have reordered global commodity markets overnight. So where does the rumor come from? Mostly from people confusing the net stable funding ratio rules, which made paper gold more expensive to hold, with an outright ban on the practice. More expensive is not illegal. Discouraged is not prohibited. Those are meaningfully different things, and the confusion between them is how a grain of truth becomes a misleading headline. Here is what the confusion tells us, though, and this part is worth sitting with. The fact that so many people are hungry for a rule like this, eager to believe that banks are finally being constrained in how they leverage physical metal, tells you something real about the current state of trust. Trust in paper markets is breaking down. Investors are looking for clarity about what they actually own versus what they merely have a claim to. And that anxiety is completely rational, even if this particular rule is not real. Because the underlying principle, if you do not hold it, you do not own it, is not a rumor. That is just true. And right now, Spot gold and spot silver are both moving in ways that suggest Wall Street is increasingly losing control of the narrative around price discovery. More on that in a moment, because that is where the really significant signal is coming from. Before I get there, I want to clear up one more piece of misinformation that has been making the rounds, because it touches directly on how the Federal Reserve System actually works. And misunderstanding it leads people to completely wrong conclusions about where safety exists and where it does not. The claim is this: North Dakota is the only state that is not part of the Federal Reserve System. This claim sounds intriguing. It sounds like a secret, like a loophole, like somewhere in the American interior, there is a state that managed to build a wall around its financial system and operate independently of the central bank. And if you are someone who has deep concerns about the Federal Reserve's reach, which is a completely legitimate thing to be concerned about, then this claim probably felt satisfying when you first heard it. But it is not true. North Dakota is absolutely part of the Federal Reserve System, just like every other state in the country. The Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis oversees the 9th Federal Reserve District, and North Dakota sits right inside that district. Its banks use the Fed's payment rails. Its clearing systems run through the Federal Reserve framework. Its regulatory structure is Federal Reserve structure. Here is where the confusion originates. North Dakota does have something genuinely unique: the Bank of North Dakota. It is the only state-owned bank in America. It was created in 1919, and it operates in close partnership with local community banks, rather than competing against them. Because it is state-owned, and because it functions differently from conventional commercial banks, people hear about it and assume it must operate outside the Federal Reserve System. It does not. The mechanism is different. The oversight is the same. There is another layer to the confusion. Many banks in North Dakota are state-chartered rather than federally chartered, and state-chartered banks have the option to not become member banks of the Federal Reserve. But optional non-membership for individual banks is not the same thing as a state being outside the system. The Fed's reach is not limited to member banks. It extends through monetary policy, through interest rate decisions, through the dollar itself, which every bank in every state uses regardless of charter status. Understanding this matters, and not just because accuracy matters. It matters because if you believe North Dakota has found a way to exist outside the Federal Reserve's influence, you might make financial decisions based on a structural reality that does not exist. The Federal Reserve's reach extends into every corner of the American financial system. That is not cynicism. That is just the architecture. If you genuinely want to position yourself outside of that architecture, and again, that is a completely legitimate goal, the path is not a state-owned bank. The path is physical gold and silver held in your possession, not a paper claim, not a certificate, not a fund, metal in your hands. That is the only form of financial sovereignty that operates truly outside the system, and it has been that way for centuries. Which brings me to Robert, and to the most important signal I want you to take away from everything we are discussing today. When Robert walked up to that teller window and asked for $8,000 in cash, the teller processed his request. No drama, no confrontation. His account had the funds, the bank had the cash. The transaction was completely legal. A currency transaction report was filed. Actually, no, wait. $8,000 is below the $10,000 threshold. No report was required at all. Robert walked out of the bank with his money. He did it because he had heard rumors of the threshold changing, and he wanted to act before it did. And while the rule has not officially changed yet, his instinct to pay attention to what is coming is the right instinct. Because here is where I need to shift your attention. Away from the rules that have not changed yet, towards something that has already happened. Something the United States Mint just did, that most people walked right past without understanding what it means. The U.S. Mint has suspended all silver numismatic products. Every collectible silver coin, every commemorative, every special edition struck in silver, gone from sale, defective immediately. The official explanation from the mint is price volatility. They need time to review pricing, given how quickly the silver market is moving. That is the statement. Now let me translate it into plain language. The mint cannot source silver at a stable enough price to sell products at a predictable markup. The largest sovereign mint in the United States, an institution backed by the full resources of the federal government, cannot reliably acquire physical silver right now at a price that makes its product catalog sustainable. That is not a minor operational hiccup. That is a structural signal. Let me put this in context. For decades, the price of silver has been primarily set not by the physical market, not by actual supply and demand for real metal, but by the paper market. Futures contracts, derivatives, leveraged positions held by a relatively small number of large trading institutions. A handful of traders could move the price of silver with keystrokes, without ever touching an ounce, without ever taking delivery of a single bar. The price was a financial construction, not a physical reality. This works fine as long as the paper market and the physical market stay loosely synchronized. As long as anyone who wants physical metal can get it at something close to the paper price. As long as the fiction of the futures contract maps onto the reality of the warehouse. But when physical demand surges, when investors want the actual metal, not the contract, and when supply tightens because industrial buyers and investment buyers are both competing for the same shrinking pool of above-ground silver, something breaks. The paper price becomes a number that no longer corresponds to what you can actually buy. The mint does not purchase futures contracts. It buys metal. And when the physical market will not sell at the paper price, the mint has no choice but to stop selling. We have seen versions of this before. In 2018, premiums on silver coins exploded while the paper price collapsed. In 2011, physical demand outran paper prices. In 2020, the pandemic triggered another physical silver shortage that lasted months. In 2022, it happened again. But each time, people said it was a temporary disruption. And each time it resolved. Until the next time. Here is what is different now. Industrial demand for silver is rising because silver is not just a monetary metal. It is a critical industrial input for solar panels, electronics, medical devices, electric vehicles. The green energy transition runs on silver. At the same time, investment demand is rising because more people are making the same calculation Robert made. I want something real, something physical, something outside the digital system. And above-ground inventories are shrinking. The buffer stock that used to smooth out these supply-demand mismatches is getting thin. The paper market can sustain a fiction for a while. It cannot sustain it forever. And when the physical market forces repricing, when the real world says your paper price is too low and we will not sell at that number, the price discovery mechanism shifts. The physical market stops following the paper market and starts leading it. That is what the mint's suspension is signaling. It is not simply a supply management decision. It is a flashing indicator that we are crossing a threshold, that the physical market is beginning to assert control over price discovery. And once physical leads, the paper market follows. It follows violently and fast. We saw something similar play out in 2008 with the gold market. In 2011, the pattern is not new, but the circumstances surrounding this moment, the combination of industrial demand, investment demand, shrinking inventories, sovereign mint suspensions, and central bank buying at levels not seen in decades, those circumstances are new. The pressure is stronger than it has been in any of those previous moments. Here is the thing about silver specifically, and why it deserves your attention separately from gold. Silver is the fuse. In every major monetary transition, in every period where confidence in paper systems has eroded significantly, silver has moved first. Faster, more volatile, more dramatic. It runs ahead of gold because it is smaller, because it has more retail participation, because the industrial demand component creates real-world price pressure that pure monetary metals do not always have. Silver is used up, manufactured into products, consumed, lost to recycling inefficiencies. The amount of silver that has been extracted from the earth and still exists in easily accessible form is actually not that large. Gold, by contrast, is not consumed. Almost every ounce of gold ever mined still exists somewhere in some form. It does not corrode. It does not get used up in circuit boards. It sits in vaults, in jewelry boxes, on wrists and in ears, in central bank reserves, in private hoards. It accumulates. And because it accumulates, because there is always a large existing stock, gold serves as the anchor. It is the reference point. It is what monetary history keeps returning to when everything else fails the test of durability. And right now, central banks around the world, the same institutions that manage the paper systems you have heard described as under stress, are buying gold at rates not seen in decades. This is not a coincidence. It is not a contradiction. It is, if you are willing to read it clearly, a confession. The institutions that build and maintain the paper financial architecture are simultaneously hedging against its failure, using the oldest reliable store of value human civilization has ever produced. They know that paper systems are cyclical. They know that debt-based monetary frameworks have a lifespan. They know that when the cycle turns, when confidence erodes past a certain point, what survives is what has always survived. Something you can hold, something that requires no counterparty, something that does not depend on any institution's promise to honor it. So they buy gold, and they do it quietly because the alternative is to publicly signal the thing they cannot afford to signal. Let me bring this back together, because we have covered a lot of ground, and I want to make sure the shape of it is clear. The $10,000 reporting rule has not officially changed, but proposals to lower it exist, and they are worth watching. What you need to know right now is that withdrawing cash, any legal amount, is your right, and it is not a crime. File the paperwork. They file the report. Life continues. The psychological discomfort around this rule is intentional. Do not let a designed discomfort prevent a rational decision. The Basel III story about banning rehypothecation is not true. No such rule was passed. But the anxiety behind the rumor, the desire for real accountability in how banks leverage paper claims against physical assets, that anxiety is completely justified. It reflects a real and rational erosion of trust in paper markets. Trust, once it starts eroding, does not typically reverse easily. North Dakota is not outside the Federal Reserve System. The Bank of North Dakota is genuinely interesting and genuinely unique, but the system's reach is total. If you want to be outside the paper system, the tool for doing that is physical metal held in your possession. That is not a complicated answer. It is just an inconvenient one for people who would prefer a more elaborate solution. And the U.S. Mint's suspension of silver numismatic products is not a footnote. It is a signal. It is the physical world pushing back against the paper price. It is the beginning of a repricing process that historically happens fast once it starts. The Mint does not suspend products because things are going well. It suspends products because the paper price no longer corresponds to the reality of what physical metal costs to acquire. Back to Robert one more time, because what happened at the teller window is not really the point of his story. The point is what he did next. He took his cash. He drove to a coin dealer he had used before. He bought silver, not paper silver, not a fund, not a certificate, physical silver. He brought it home. He held it in his hands. And then he called his daughter and explained to her what he had done and why. His daughter, a 38-year-old marketing director, had never thought about physical precious metals in her life. She thought it was an old person's hobby, a relic from a different era. She half listened. Then she went online that evening and started reading about the U.S. Mint suspension, about silver premiums, about central bank gold buying, and she called her father back. "Dad," she said, "I think I need to do what you did." That is how these things actually spread. Not through fear, through a father who paid enough attention to act and a daughter who trusted what she saw when she looked for herself. You are in a similar position right now. You have heard the rumors. You have heard the alarm bells, some of them false, some of them real. And now you have a clearer picture of which is which. The rule has not changed yet. The Basel III story is not what people said it was. North Dakota is inside the system. And the Mint just told you, in the plainest language an institution ever uses, action rather than statement, that the physical silver market is under real strain. What you do with that information is your decision. But the informed decision is almost always made before the announcement, not after it. The people who position themselves thoughtfully right now, not in panic, not in speculation, but in deliberate, eyes-open preparation, are the ones who look back later and say they saw it coming. Not because they had a crystal ball, because they were paying attention to the right signals at the right time. The $10,000 rule may change. The threshold may come down. The reporting requirements may tighten. Those proposals exist and they are worth watching. But between now and then, you have the legal right to move your money as you see fit. You have the right to hold physical assets outside the banking system. You have the right to make decisions based on what you observe rather than what you are told to believe. The physical market is starting to lead. The paper market is starting to follow. And the Mint's silence, every silver collectible page showing out of stock, is louder than anything the official statements are saying. Silver runs first, gold anchors, and the people who hold both, in physical form, in their own possession, have something no regulatory change can reach. No reporting threshold adjustment, no algorithmic flag, no rehypothecation arrangement applies to metal that lives outside the financial system entirely. That is not a radical position. It is just a historically informed one. And history, in this particular domain, has a very consistent record. Pay attention to what is happening in the physical markets. Watch the premiums. Watch the Mint. Watch what the central banks are buying, while the paper narrative says something different. The signals are there. They have been there. Robert saw them on a Tuesday morning in January, and he did something about it. The window is always open until it is not. Right now, it is open. The question is whether you are paying attention.